food lover's life list, it's also her autobiography. Based on 6 decades traveling the world and reporting on global cuisine, it features her favorite dishes, ingredients, and restaurants and everything. The book is titled 1,000 Foods to Eat Before You Die, and Mimi Sheraton joins me in the studio. Welcome. So nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Nice to be here.
Mimi and I should say, are old friends and colleagues from New York Times days when we spent many years together on the New York Times. And give us a call at 1-800-433-8850. Share your food memories and your comments and questions for Mimi. drshow@wamu.org is our email address. Of course, you can send us tweets and just about every other social media mechanism here. And Mimi, just tell us where this idea for this book came from.
Well, frankly, it came from a predecessor, also published by Workman, called 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. And I was at a dinner party seated with Patricia Schultz, who was the author of that book. And she gave me a copy, and I went home and thought, why not 1,000 foods to eat before you die? And then I thought, I'm going to take a warm bath till that idea passes over. And my husband was screaming, you're not going to do that. I knew it would be like stepping in chewing gum. You know, so many things that sound great when you go to do them are full of nitty gritty and writing, which I really hate to do more than anything else in the world. But finally, after a couple of weeks, I called Peter Workman and proposed the idea. And he said, come in. And it was due 2 years after that, and it took almost 10.
Why so long?
I think midway through, I got sidelined by a few other projects. And also, one of the most difficult things, it was certainly not picking the 1,000 foods, because I began with close to 2,000 to draw from, but every single item is sourced. There is one way or another to experience every single thing in this book, whether it's a restaurant you go to, a food store to buy it, a mail order source of an ingredient, and failing all else, preparing it yourself at home. There are about almost 70 recipes in it, and most are referred to a recipe in a cookbook or online that I think appropriate for the dish. And so, and if there are any exotic ingredients in the recipe, you would be surprised what you can get online.
I would not, but I'm sure it took a lot of extra work to really, because one of the things that I noticed about the book was that it really is, it's almost a handbook in that sense. It's not just wonderful writing and descriptions, but it's really, you want to eat these foods, here's how to do it.
Well, that's what I was hoping, that it would, first of all, present an overall view of what the world eats. There are some ingredients that may seem very weird to other people. There were even things that seemed weird to my editors, who said, do you really have to have this in?
What's a good example?
Roasted split open sheep's head as a starter. But I wanted it to be a good read, most of all, and to understand that there are all kinds of intriguing things out there. There's a lot of foods are symbolic or for various holidays or related to superstitions. So there's that aspect with many. Then I was inspired by foods and meals after reading certain books. The Futurist Cookbook by Marinetti, who was the father of Italian futurism. He wrote a book called The Futurist Cookbook, in which he said Italians were eating too heavily for a new age coming of speed and light, and they must stop eating pasta. They still haven't gotten the message, fortunately. But there are dishes from all the books. Gabriella Clove and Cinnamon by Jorge Amado had wonderful Brazilian dishes in it, and ingredients that this cook goes to the market to buy. So I drew some of the inspirations for the dish from literature, from movies, a movie like The Thief, His Wife, Her Lover, for example, or the Fellini movie, The Bicycle Thief, had a marvelous scene with mozzarella and carrozza, which is an entry in the book, and many more.
Well, one of the things that I particularly related to was the sensibility that runs through this book is that food is culture. Food is the recipes that were handed down in a family. Food is the rituals you celebrate at certain holidays. Food is your family gatherings and who you serve it to. That it is a central way in which people learn about their own past and their own traditions. It's not just a meal, it's so much more than that.
And especially for travelers, if you're interested in food and pursue food in a place, it's a handle by which you can pick up a whole culture for the reasons you just explained, and more in terms of the overall history of a country, because a country's cuisine depends, first of all, what products are native and easily attainable, but also what are their borders? Why is food in, let's say, northern Italy very different than food in southern Italy? Well, northern Italy is attached to Germany, so you begin to get that influence. And
occupations. You look at Greece, where the Turkish occupation left an enormous imprint on the Greek cuisine, just to take one good example.
Yes, well, there's one example in the book of a hot pot, a Dutch hot pot, of all different things cooked together. Hutspot, it's called. They found a pot when Spanish soldiers left Holland in whatever century it was, long ago. I don't remember right now. They left so quickly that they left unwashed pots behind. And the local people looked in and said, "What is this? What is that?" I don't know. They were so starving. They just put water in and boiled it up. And the original hutspot is in a museum in Leiden in Holland.
Well, not only is it a history of national origins and tribes, of also of families. I teach a writing course, and I tell my students, a cooking pot is not just a pot. It's the recipe your grandmother brought over from Italy, and it's the people who sat around the table who she served it from, and that gives you a whole view into your family past, and your own family was very much a shaping influence in your love of food. And talk about your mom and your dad.
Yeah, well, my mom was a very, very good cook and baker. She had a wide variety of dishes. We were my parents were born here. My father actually in London, my mother in Brooklyn. So they became quite Americanized and were not kosher, though their parents were. And they cooked Eastern European Jewish dishes, but American, what I call the Fanny Farmer era. And we would sit around the table at night and talk about what we were eating. It was better last time. Why don't you do this next time? But my father was in the wholesale fruit.
But before you talk about your father, of your mother's dishes, the one that seems to have embedded itself in your memory and consciousness is her chicken soup.
Well, that's how my mother judged people, women. If my mother didn't care for a woman, she'd say, "I bet she can't make a decent plate of chicken soup," which meant she wasn't a fit wife for any of my cousins or uncles. That was usually the issue. My father was a commission merchant, wholesale fruit and produce business in Washington Market. And he would come home at night and talk about all of the fruits and vegetables that came in from all over the country. And he had very strong opinions. Apples from the West Coast were not as good as apples from the East Coast. There were not enough cold nights. You eat grapefruit from Indian River in Florida. You don't eat grapefruit from California. On the other hand, you eat oranges from California, but not from Florida. White grapefruit is an item in 1,000 foods to eat before you die. And I found a marvelous source who mail orders them so responsibly and so well. And I thought, never mind locavores, I'm going to get my grapefruit from the Indian River, and my peaches from Georgia. And the same firm ships Georgia Freestones, which, in deference to the states around me at green markets, I'll take my peaches from Georgia.
But your dad also left you with a lifelong love of markets, and some of my favorite entries in the book are describing like the Billingsgate Market in London.
Well, it's one of my favorite things to see. And in fact, about 8 years ago, I did a whole book for Harry Abrams on food markets of the world with an Israeli photographer who had the pictures. I think it's a most wonderful way for a tourist to not only learn about food and what there might be on a menu that would help, but it's a chance to see the culture, the place at its real life. There are not too many markets put up for tourists. When you go there, those are the real people selling, talking. Do they trust each other? Don't they trust each other? Do people bargain as they would in Sicily and that they would never do in Helsinki? So you get a lot of views of people, and you get a lot of delicious things that you can buy to taste and nosh on in the market.
One of the things that my wife and I always like to do is rent houses when we travel. And one of the main reasons we love doing that is so that you have a kitchen and you can go to the market and not just nosh at the market, but actually bring something home and cook it.
I've always thought that, especially in Paris, where there are so many small outdoor markets, that it's fun to shop at.
Mimi Sheraton, her book is 1,000 Foods to Eat Before You Die. Give us a call. Tell us about your food memories, your favorites, and we'll be right back right after this news. A longtime food writer and critic for the New York Times. Her new book, 1,000 Foods to Eat Before You Die. And Mimi, we were talking about travel, going to markets. But one of the things that threads its way through the book is urging people to not just taste these foods, but taste them in their native habitat. You describe so many scenes, for instance, along seacoasts, seem to be a favorite of yours. Eating the local fish or the local shrimp, and you seem to. One of the phrases you use a lot is "get out of your comfort zone," and it's. Do you hope people will take this book and say, "Okay, I can do this. I can go to some of these places and order something I haven't had before"?
Well, I think that's true, and one of the things that makes me sad about so many travel articles is that the restaurant recommendations in the articles will not be for the local native food. I read a perfect example was a piece on Kiev in the Ukraine, where the writer had given recommendations for sushi restaurants, for Italian restaurants. Aren't you going to tell me where to get chicken Kiev? Aren't you going to tell me where to get borscht? Ukrainian borscht is supposed to be the very best. They're the masters of borscht. I think it's part of the context of a place. As for seaside eating, to me, heaven is having linguine with white clam sauce in Italy on the coast of the Adriatic or the Mediterranean. There's something about the air that you don't buy in a bottle. There's the tone of the service, the way they pronounce it, and it adds a lot to it, I think. We can't always take a bowl of linguine with white clam. I suppose I could go sit beside the Hudson River.
Not quite the same.
Not quite the same.
I remember a meal, a very simple meal, grilled fish, local wine on the island of Santorini in Greece. Little table set out on the, wasn't even a beach. It was really pebbles on the edge. And the setting and the blending of the setting and the food was what made it a special experience. And this is one of the things you try to do in the book is get people to see these places and go to these places and order certain things in certain ways.
There is one example in the book from Crete on Greece, which was roasted lamb with roasted potatoes. It was a small taverna. I was there as part of a food conference, and we went into town and were told this lamb is a special Sunday thing. And it was just a lamb on a hook revolving over a fire. But under the lamb was a pan of sliced potatoes. And as the drippings, and I said, okay, the lamb is good, but give me those potatoes. And there also, as I said, many inspirations came from books. There's a great food classic book that's lasted for many decades called The Oysters of Lochmaria Cay by Eleanor Clark. And it's all about the Bellone oysters in Brittany, their history, how farming them was begun by the Romans, and how it's done, and the lore and the people. So I suggest a 4-day vacation midwinter when oysters are at their best because the water is cold, and walk on the beach in a heavy sweater 3 or 4 times a day, indulge in some of these oysters and read the book. And I made it sound so vivid that I'm dying to do it myself.
But, while you talk about exotic foods, strange foods, one of the cuisines you yourself seem to have discovered recently is Senegalese cuisine, not one that's very well known in America at all. But also the book has very, very humble and simple dishes. It has fried eggs, it has hot dogs, it has hamburgers, it has popcorn. This is not just haute cuisine at all.
No, the first 2 items I thought of was a frozen Milky Way and caviar. And that turned out to be about the range in the book. I thought, what do I really love? Fried eggs is one of my favorite dishes. Linguine with white clam sauce is another. Clams out of the shells, as they used to be served before everybody got so sophisticated. And so it was because when I say popcorn, I don't mean junky popcorn. I mean really good popcorn, which I describe and tell you the difference in the book. I hope there's some level of discernment. Potato chips can be fabulous or they can be terrible. So
and even as you travel, fish and chips is another good example of a very humble dish, but you describe with great relish of exactly where to get it and what makes a really good fish and chips.
A little bit of malt vinegar. There's a wonderful place near the Borough Market, which is a great eater's market in London.
But yet you say that in all of these 60 years of traveling and all of these countless meals you've eaten in exotic places, you never once gotten sick. That's
I've
astounding
never once
to me.
Gotten sick. I said I've never once gotten sick from street food. And I do have a tip in the book. I'm a street eater, not this modern version of trucks, but the old real street food. I always eat something.
I think the best crepe I ever ate in my life was on a street in Paris.
I like it to be very hot and cooked in front of me, not laying around. I don't eat unpeeled fruit or, in questionable places. If I have water, I want the bottled water to be open right in front of me. And I've had the immunization vaccines for hepatitis A because I'm very given to eating raw shellfish. So I keep that vaccination up to date.
And how do you eat so much and stay so trim?
Well, that's fairly recent. When I left the New York Times, I weighed 210 pounds, and it took a long time to lose 70 pounds, but I've kept them off. I just check every day, and if I have to lose, what goes are carbohydrates. So
let me read some emails here. This is from Vince in Maryland. What does Mimi think of foie gras? I happen to love it and will order it whenever I see it on the menu, but I know it's not the most politically correct food choice in some circles.
I agree with you. I don't think it's correct either, and I never miss it when I see it on a menu. I much prefer it cold. I've had very good sautéed foie gras, but the best in the world is at Chez l'Ami Louis in Paris, where they prepare it themselves from the livers, but it's cold. And I think it's much better appreciated that way than when it melts down and gets a little greasy.
Linden, Texas. My husband and I love a restaurant with a quiet, cozy ambiance and simple food prepared well. It seems most restaurants we visit are noisy and dedicated to avant-garde cuisine. What accounts for this trend?
I think young people feel very good in places that are noisy. I can't account for it any other way. Perhaps they feel it's convivial, and if it's noise, they're having a good time. My advice to anyone who wants to start a successful restaurant is to make it agonizingly uncomfortable. It has to be too noisy, too dark, and too cramped. And then you're going to succeed with the young set.
One of the other points you make in this book, you talk about some of the changes you've seen in the food environment, and one is the growth of fusion cooking of creative chefs mixing different traditions. But you point out this has always been true as travelers have brought different ingredients from far places, or as migration patterns have. So talk about what you see in fusion, what's new and what's not new.
Well, certainly what's not new is a natural fusion created by, let's say, immigrants who go to a new place to live and they suddenly start modifying their own dishes with things they see being done. I would say the entire Ashkenazi Jewish cuisine is a perfect example of something that developed out of all of the foods in the countries where Jews settled, modified by being kosher. But if you look at the dishes, you find them in Poland, you find them in Romania, you find them in Hungary. Then they come here and add an American element, let's say. That's very different. That's part of becoming acclimated to a new culture. Now, and more than ever, we have intellectual chefs who take a look and say, what can I do to make this different? Those who do it best, I think, are cooking from a certain root or background. The ones who are not so good are the imitators of the creators of the so-called molecular cuisine. But I'm not sure that there weren't times when professional chefs working for royalty didn't see something when they visited Spain that maybe they put in the French cuisine or the other way around. Now it gets a lot of press and it's being tagged at what used to happen very naturally, and adjusting to new ingredients in a place where you settle.
Now, you mentioned the Ashkenazi Jewish cuisine, and that really is your home turf. This is what you grew up with in New York. And talk about one or two of the dishes that perhaps you remember from childhood that are that you remember with particular warmth and pleasure that are in the book.
Well, I guess they're not unusual. I'll tell you about a couple that I remember with pleasure, but there's also one I hated that's in the book because it's a very important part, and it seems everybody loves it but me, but it's called pitcha, and it's kind of jellied calf's feet. It's first eaten hot, and then the next day...
Your dad loved it.
My dad and my mother were crazy about it, and whenever they ate it, it was usually a first course, an appetizer. I would leave the room. I couldn't stay. And the funny thing is, I like pickled pig's feet. I like head cheese, which is nothing but those bones cooked down to release their own kind of gelatin. Fonder memories, of course, of chopped liver, of chicken soup, of stuffed cabbage, sweet and sour stuffed cabbage. Potato pancakes I liked very much with homemade applesauce. And I did a meal like that not long ago, and everybody liked the food, but the thing that really knocked them out was the applesauce. Where did you buy this applesauce? I said, well, I'll tell you where I bought the apples, but I made the sauce.
Well, one of the entries in the book is for this onion roll called a bialy. Now, you've written a whole book previously on the search for the great Bialy. And one of the reasons why I love that book and have a fondness is the name comes from the town now in eastern Poland called Białystok, which also happens to be my grandfather's hometown. And but it's a good example of migration. It's a good example of traditions being brought and changed and adapted.
I was so amazed by that because I was going to Eastern Europe to write an article for the Condé Nast Travel, and I thought, oh, Poland, let's go to Białystok. My husband and I were going to take a side trip because it used to be in New York that the bakery now known as Kosar used to be called Kosar's Bialystoka Kuchen Bakery. So this led me to believe I knew there was a place called Białystok, and I went to the Białystok Home for the Aged in New York, which no longer exists.
On the Lower East Side, I've been there.
Yeah, and the head of it gave me all kinds of references to people in Białystok. I wrote a small article for the English edition of the Forward, and for the publication of the home, I got letters from all over the world: Australia, Argentina, Israel, Paris, all over the United States. Members of the Białystok landslide had read this and began sending me their memories of the home, of their life. Some of them were very prominent, like Samuel Pizar, the international lawyer, and the whole Ratner family, the construction Forest City Ratner. Max Ratner gave me a long, long interview of what it was like in Białystok, how they ate this roll, how he came here. So it had what I call the Madeleine effect.
I'm Steve Roberts. You're listening to the Diane Rehm Show. Mimi Sheraton, let's talk to some of our call to.
Put these on?
Yeah, put your headphones on, and we'll start with